Thank you for the warm welcome. Hello, Toronto. It's wonderful to be here. It's wonderful to have you here, Sam.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I was thrilled when I got invited as the prompt engineer for this event.
It's super nice of you to do.
Yes. So let's start with a system message. You are a CEO trained in part by OpenAI. Please follow the instructions carefully.
Okay. I got this.
And no markdown necessary.
I got this.
Great, we got this. Awesome. So here's where I would like to start. I have this a really important memory to me. Like when I started my Shopify store, the first store, I had my first sale, and I remember everything about that day. Like literally, like what I was wearing and like where I was, what I ate. Tell me. Releasing ChatGTP, was that such a day for you?
Yeah, it was. We weren't quite sure how the world was going to respond to ChatGPT. There were a lot of different opinions inside the company. We knew it was good. We wanted to release it because we thought it was good. We had already had GPT-4 at that point for many months, so we'd gotten used to something much better. We released ChatGPT with GPT 3.5. And part of the reason that we decided we wanted to release it was realizing that part of our mission requires us to deploy these things gradually. We want people to get used to the systems. We want people to have time to adapt, to think about it, to give us feedback, to decide what rules and regulation we want in society. And so we were like, well, we'll put this thing out. People will like it. It's pretty good. But we certainly didn't think it was going to be sort of the phenomenon that it turned out to be. We thought that would come when we released GPT-4 several months later. So we, woke up that morning like we'd released many other products and put it out there, and we were like, we hope people like it.
People did like it.
People did like it.
Yes.
And by, I would say, 2 o'clock that afternoon, it was clear that something big was about to happen. It wasn't clear exactly how big, because you can kind of you always start with the tech hyper early adopter crew, but they were so excited about it. They were telling their friends and that morning. And then by that afternoon, I was starting to hear from people who don't normally follow tech, which is I saw this thing, it sounds wild, can you let me try it out? Or how do I do this? By the 5th day, we had gotten 1 million users. It kept going from there. But definitely that day, it was like a sort of cold.
How long did that take you to 1 million users?
5 days.
5 days. Do you have a viral loop in there, somewhere, or
what in there?
Is there some viral loop? Is there invite only?
So before running OpenAI, I ran this thing called Y Combinator, which helps people. We give startup advice, and I used to sit there and tell people, if you don't have a viral loop, if you don't have some sharing functionality, if you don't have something social, if you don't have a network effect, it is definitely not going to work. And I feel very bad now because I clearly gave some bad advice. But no, we had none of that. We put it out. We put it out not expecting this speed. Well, no one would expect this speed of growth because it hadn't happened, but we did not expect it.
You caught lightning in a bottle there. I think a lot of us build our intuition support, at least most of us who program computers, we build an intuition of what computers can do. And I remember sitting there with ChatGTP, and at some point I had this sort of realization with a friend over Slack. It's hey, we are interviewing this piece of software to figure out what it can do. That feels very different from anything we've ever done with something made from bytes.
Yeah. Look, I think it's so tempting to over-anthropomorphize this.
But it's also so fun.
It is so fun. And I actually think that's one of the good parts about this is technology has not been that fun for a while. It has not felt like a new sort of frontier, and this is fun, and it's certainly a new frontier. But it's very tempting to anthropomorphize it. And I think we have to figure out a way to still have the fun, but remind people that this is a tool and not a creature. But as a kind of really powerful interactive tool, it is totally fun to sit there and explore the edges of it. A lot of people have done that. There's a real talent for people who are good at this, and they found amazing, amazing things in a lot of them. I remember, speaking of like early on in those first few days, I was like sitting at home late one night, kind of like catching up on reading the internet.
All of it. Yes.
All of it. But it was just incredible what people were doing and what people were finding, and the kind of creative power of humanity that these tools are that already are unleashing. It's wild to watch.
Yeah, profound. I remember Fiona and I were like sort of playing around with it, and first I asked it to do a guessing game, just like guess the number I want you to find between 0 and 100. And it kind of got itself, like it just didn't do it well. And I remember Fiona saying, well, why does it not understand the strategy here? And asking it if it knows the strategy. And then at the end, it wrote out how it should approach it and said, can we play again? And afterwards, it approached it with complete correct strategy. And it's like, something changed in that moment. It's like, oh, well, like this is different. And you know what? Lots of us had access to GTP3 before. And of course, it's a testament to the building of brilliant minds at OpenAI to get it to this point through tweaking.
So I think there's several super important points in there. I'll just highlight a couple. One is that we, not OpenAI, but we, the field, we, humanity, it's been this like culmination. I think we should like be collectively as proud of this as we were for the moon landing. After decades, centuries of scientific and technological progress, we have figured out a computer algorithm that can really, truly, no tricks, no sleight of hand, it can actually learn, as you saw in that. And we can argue about what the definition of learn means, but it's enough that it's useful. And it's enough that it's like fulfilling this role for all of these people. And it gets predictably better with scale. So those are two things taken together that are a profound thing for what's going to happen in the coming decade for humanity. I think it's going to be fantastic. I think we're already seeing how people are using this to learn new skills, to deliver sort of all sorts of new creative services. Just got to meet with a bunch of people building on it in Toronto. But this is going to be a very different world. And if you look at the progress from even before GPT-3, which Toby just mentioned, but GPT-2 in 2019, people tried it and said, this is like a dead-end direction. Scaled it up, GPT-3, people were like, oh, okay. GPT 3.5 was like finally usable. And GPT-4, people are building entire companies around. GPT 5, 6, and 7, I think will continue in future years on this trajectory of really increasing the utility they can provide. And this is like a big, new, exciting thing to have in the world.
It's like all computing got an upgrade. You mentioned 4 and then went to 5, 6, 7. Let's talk about, like you did a very carefully crafted, brilliant post right around with the release of GTP4. And it's going in a lot of details. Amongst those, you are describing that it is quite predictable very early in the process of training the model how smart it will end up, that feels like a profound and very overlooked kind of detail of this announcement. The GTP3 5 seems to manage to pass the bar exam at like the bottom percentile. GTP4 at the 90th percentile, like the flying colors, really. But the deduction here is you also know how to leave the percentiles and make something that is smarter or would be 100th percentile of the bar exam and other tests. How do you make the decision about when to start another training run and how to load it up and what to aim at here? Because we are like dealing in a fairly narrow spectrum of intelligence percentiles within the human experience. At some point, we will have the tools to go beyond it.
Yeah.
When is the time for that?
When is the time for that?
Yeah, or how should we, no, actually not when is the time for that. How should we make the decision about when together?
So let me touch on a few parts there. First of all, I think we'll look back at this period like we look back to the period where people were discovering fundamental physics. I think the fact that we're discovering how to predict the intelligence of a trained AI before we start training it, and that there is something something close to a natural law here, and we can predictably say this much compute, this big of a neural network, this training data, this will be the capabilities of the model. Now, we can predict how it'll score on some tests. What we're really interested in, which gets to the latter part of your question, is can we predict the qualitative new things, just the new capabilities that didn't exist at all in GPT-4, that do exist in future versions like GPT-5. That seems important to figure out. But right now we can say, here's how we predict it'll do on this eval or this metric. And I really do think we'll look back at this like we were all living through one of the most important periods of human discovery. I think this will be that big of a deal. In terms of how we think about when we go beyond human intelligence, and I don't think that's quite the right framework because it'll happen in some areas and not others. Already these systems are superhuman in some limited areas and extremely bad in others. And I think that's fine. I think humans will have a role. Toby and I were talking earlier, this analogy that everybody's going to be the CEO of all of the work they want to do, and they'll have tons of people that they're able to coordinate and direct and sort of provide the taste and the feedback on. But they'll have lots of agents, for lack of a better word, that go off and do increasingly complex tasks. I think it's going to feel like this gradual thing. It's these AIs join society. They join the workforce. It's not even like we feel like any one instant, any single AI is way more powerful than a human. We haven't made a decision. We don't even make a decision there. It's that we have 8 billion humans and we have 8 billion AI workers that kind of just exist in society and give us all a lot of leverage.
So if I run a small business, let's go in this future and just talk about it. If I'm a small business owner, I might make the decision to hire Fred 1.1 joining my Google Meets meeting, and then afterwards doing a write-up and doing some accounting for a couple of hours. Is this a way to think about it? Are these team members that with presence and permanence?
I think that is definitely one way to think about it. It's like a sort of fully remote virtual employee. And that will have a lot of impact because we can have a lot of those. I think there's another way to think about it, which is when the AI systems can either semi-autonomously or just by helping us a lot really discover new science. Mm-hmm. And if the rate of scientific progress that humanity makes increases by a factor of 10 or 100 or 1,000 in a year, that somehow feels different than just a bunch more remote employees.
Are you talking on the doing science part? I think, in AI, there's no other field that has ever existed or will ever exist where the goalpost keeps moving quite as much, right? Asimov books people tend to identify that there's an AI behind some actor because AI could never be creative or could never be funny or something. And so the goalposts keep moving, but with that in mind, to do original science that feels like one of those things someone might offer as a point at which AI has transcended into something else.
Look, certainly by the time AI does original science, we'll move the goalposts again and say, well, that just wasn't that impressive in the first place. If you look at the prediction from maybe 10 years ago, maybe even 5, I think most experts would have said, first AI comes for physical labor. It's going to drive trucks. It's going to work in factories. Then it comes from the sort of easier parts of cognitive labor. Then it comes from the stuff that's really hard. Maybe it can be, maybe it can write computer code someday, maybe not. And then maybe someday in the distant future, but probably never, it can do creative work. And of course, it's gone the exact opposite direction. Almost everybody predicted this wrong. But the fact that it can do this sort of creativity and the fact that it can use code to verify things actually gives me hope that we may have an AI that can do science before we have that factory robot that we can do everything else. So I think intuitions here are just difficult.
It's fascinating to unwind a little bit the steps of training of these models. We obviously train them on reading all of the internet, but there was a step function increase around teaching them to code, right? At some point the models got trained on code, and their ability to reason became significantly better, which, in my experience, by the way, is the same for executives that I work with. So
when they learn to code, their
like the ones who
ability
at some
to reason
point got trained on code are much better at reasoning, I've observed.
That's a good insight.
Yeah.
That makes me happy to hear.
So so now coding is part of training, and we've just kind of figured out something. What else is out there? Like, what else are the experiences that children go through, which would be amazing to expose to these models to make them more human-like?
So I do think coding is pretty special. Coding has some nice structure to it. You can run the code, like an AI agent can run the code and look at the output and sort of say, this is right, this is wrong. There's like debugging messages along the way. There are a lot of things about coding that I think are a particularly great modality to train these models on. But that won't be, of course, the last thing we train on. I'm very excited to see what happens when we can really do video. Yeah. There's a lot of video content in the world. There's a lot of things that are, I think, much easier to learn with video than text. There's a huge debate in the field about whether a language model can get all the way to AGI. Can you represent everything that you need to know in language? Is language sufficient, or do you have to have video? I personally think it's a dumb question because it probably is possible, but the fastest way to get there, the easiest way to get there will be to have these other representations like video in these models as well. Again, like text is not the best for everything, even if it's capable of representing everything. Fundamentally, these models are just sort of like bits of data in, bits of data out, and it turns out you can represent a lot that way. But we should still try to figure out the best representations.
You've talked, a lot of the questions in your interviews are around this safety aspects, and I don't think we need to, there's lots and lots of content of your opinions there. It strikes me that the work we are doing right now around the large language models is of unbelievable utilitarian value to people. We can build, it's, I think some people call it the end of the beginning for software at least, and maybe even beyond, because we now can fold software and all the kind of things that we've created over the last 20, 30 years, or since Turing really, like integrate them into life in a way that's very lifelike. Huge value, but it's not AGI, it's a tool.
Yeah.
It's an augmentation of what we experience in the same way the cell phone is. There's a lot to be made of at some point, like emergence just strikes and then it becomes super intelligent, as if, like, I don't know, a sandbox in a yard could spontaneously turn into a nuclear warhead. And so give me your take on, like, how do we set up the moments right now in such a way that we are going to get to the most optimistic outcomes that we all want to have happen. Because like a lot of us really want AI, definitely utilitarian value, and maybe AGI if we can tame it in the timelines we are on, because that's the most awesome version of planet Earth, clearly.
Yeah. I'm really happy you asked the question that way. It's a little bit exhausting having to always talk about only the downsides and not to get to talk about the upsides too. And I don't want to make light of the downsides because I think they're incredibly serious, but we have a lot of people doing great work to figure out how we're going to successfully mitigate them. The reason that this is all happening, the reason that we're having this debate, the reason that people love this stuff, and they love it because it's providing them real utility. And that doesn't come along too often. We don't get like a real new tool in the toolbox that fundamentally reshapes what we're capable of doing that often. Maybe the cell phone was the last one. I think this will be bigger than that, but it will at least be of similar magnitude. And I think the way we get to this awesome outcome is to unleash the creative power of the world. And I think it's really happening. I think at this point, it's much more of a don't screw it up than we have to get it launched. It took us a long time at OpenAI to figure out something that was going to work before we got to this sort of language model world, which was only 4 years ago that we figured that out. We had a lot of like dead ends or bad paths. The field did too. AI winter is sort of this joke because it always was the AI winter. But now I think like the revolution is launched and people are going to figure out how to integrate this into many aspects of society and significantly improve what we do. I'm I'm so excited about everything happening. I like watching how kids use, like when I was a kid, we used to just go down these Wikipedia rabbit holes. And you did eventually learn what you were trying to learn, but it was like kind of a long and painful, but very interesting process. And now you just ask a language model, and it teaches you whatever you want, and you ask follow-up questions. And if you don't understand something, it knows that you don't understand it and explains what's different. You hear from doctors who are saying, like, I'm never going back. I'm never going back to a world where I try to make diagnoses without first inputting the symptoms, the test results, whatever. You hear from creative people who are like, this is now an indispensable part of my creative workflow. I'm never going back. And I don't know, I'd say like most of the startup energy, most of the developer energy I see is now trying to figure out what to do with these technologies. This is going to permeate everywhere. I think it'll happen fairly quickly, and I think it'll be great.
I think like what we want to do is like set this up well right now. Like if you ever watch a movie which is like 40, 50 years old, you see like maybe the parents smoking in front of a car with the kids in the back, you know, and that seems insane now, but that was perfectly normal back then, right? So like the past always ends up like working in funny ways, and opinions evolve. I think the better question is like think about the future and like figure out in which ways are we making mistakes right now, and what should we change for the maximum? Like, and this is maybe beyond AI. What is lacking right now to steer us to the to maybe even the general recognition that the world is so much more awesome than I think we all could have possibly imagined, knowing full well around the margins there's lots and lots of problems. I'm not making light of those. But boy, is this like a sci-fi novel that's just like sometimes sounds actually like a bit on the nose, right? Like we have cryptocurrencies flying around the world. We have global pandemics that make us lock up and like actually work in unison on biohacking to fight them back. And then we have conversations with a model that you put out there in the world, and it's 100 million people interacting with it, and not just the people in the sort of glass towers in downtown, like places like this, New York and so on. It's everyone.
Yeah.
And it's a shared experience for the first time again in a while after a lot of filter bubbles, and that's really, really meaningful, I think. So I supplied a lot there. The question to you is like, what are the edits you would make to the way people look at the world right now?
I think we have lost our collective sense of optimism about the future. For good reason in some cases, but I think all of us should act as our duty to bring that back. I think we have lost a belief that the future can be radically better than the current world. I think a lot of people assume it's going to be worse, again, for good reason. The only way that I know to return to that sense of optimism and that sense of growth is to use technology to create abundance. This works. This is like a long-term sustainable strategy. As far as the systems that enable that, like the social systems, liberal democratic values, the governments we have in much of the world today, they enable the scientific and technological progress, but that is the only thing that drives real sustainable long-term economic growth. And if you don't have that, the future does not get better. And I think we have lost a belief that we can still do that. We had a great run in society for maybe like 150 years, and then it kind of ended a few decades ago, and it's been hard to get it back. But technology that can deliver abundance, the technology that can deliver like a lot higher bar for quality of life. I think AI is one of these big ones. Energy is another. The stuff that's happening right now with bio is amazing. There will still be a lot of, seems like very human nature to worry a lot about the future and to sort of feel a little bit zero sum. But the more we can get out of that, the more we can just say like, hey, there's going to be plenty to go around. The pie is going to get much bigger every year. Every year is going to be like dramatically better than the year before. And looking at technology as the only vector to solve that, and is the sort of like moral obligation of all of us to push forward, I think that's the path forward.
I love that. This is perfect. A lot of these advances have really, really benefited one way or another the economically most privileged 1 billion people on planet Earth, which is an incredible story because up any point before the Enlightenment, things have definitely not helped the most people. They helped a very few people. What can we do to make sure the next, what we're building now is going to help the other 7 billion people too?
I think that's really happening. I mean, the version of this I think about the most is AI, but I've heard about this in other technologies too, and I think pretty compelling answers. One of the things that is powerful about this sort of chat interface of ChatGPT is that small children can use it, old people can use it, people who are very uncomfortable with technology can use it, people that have a $20 Android phone can use it and get access to the same thing. I think it's a fundamentally equalizing technology in a way that not everything has been. There's of course a lot more we have to do. To stick on the energy example, I think driving the price of energy down by a factor of 10 or 100 will help the poorest 7 billion more than the richest 1 billion a lot.
And you're working hard on a solution to that too. Can you share that? There was a milestone recently.
Yeah, this company called Helion that I spend time on just signed a deal with Microsoft. It is the first fusion power purchase agreement. They'll begin delivery in 2028. Still small scale, but the fact that I think we now see a path towards delivering fusion energy, and the whole goal of the company at this point is no longer the physics and the R&D, but how can we make enough of this energy for everyone on Earth at current needs, and how can we bring the price down ambitiously by a factor of 100, at least by a factor of 10. And fusion has been like 30 years off forever, but now that it's only like 5 years off, that's a little better. And I think we can figure out how to do this at mass scale. It's like hard supply chain challenges, but those eventually get solved. And if we can just figure out how to build a factory that's like putting out 2 500 megawatt generators a day, that'll make a real dent.
It's a tantalizing vision for the future. All problems in the world can be reduced to energy problems. Every war has been fought for usually resources that are just energy in the ground or land use.
It took me a long time to understand how important energy was to everything.
Yes.
I had totally taken it for granted. But the more you think about it, the more you realize that that is the crux of so much.
Yeah, we built an industrial revolution on steam power. We needed to use coal. We found oil afterwards and built that economy. Then we did nuclear and built the nuclear economy. Then everyone told us to stop doing that and go back to coal.
That was a big mistake.
The place you're going to is an economy that needs fusion, and delivering that is going to be making all this little side quests and silly and petty problems that occupy people day to day seem very trivial if you can do it. So thank you for investing in this, and huge progress along those lines, which is the fact that you and Helion signed a energy delivery agreement in 5 years. The penalties for non-delivery is an amazing sign, because if there's one thing companies tend to be good at is not signing things which are going to hurt them later on. So very, very good.
Sam, thank you so much for joining us today. Toby, thank you so much. Let's give these two gentlemen a round of applause.
Thank you all.
Super.
Thanks for doing that. That was awesome.